All
I
right.
think, Judge, you might be muted if you're trying to say something.
Let's
Trevor, and,
start our.
you will need to speak up a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, I am ready to begin when everyone's ready. Before we begin, I just want to thank everyone for judging. I want to congratulate my competitors on a great prelim round yesterday. So if everyone is ready, I'll give a brief off-time roadmap. Basically, it's just going to go topic, overview, observations, framing, just like some burdens and definitions. Then I'll get into my team's contentions and subpoints. So if the judges, partner, and opponents are ready, please begin on my first ward. The U.S. ought to prioritize the acceptance of refugees from countries that the U.S. military has invaded. Let's get into observations. One, this is a value round seeing the word ought, meaning if it is morally correct. As the government side, we do not have to provide you with a plan or prove how this will actually happen. We are simply arguing, is it morally correct to do this? My opponents are arguing that it is not morally correct to do this. Prioritizing the topic doesn't mean an increase in the acceptance of refugees. It can mean an increase in the acceptance of refugees, but it also means, like we are prioritizing under the current refugee framework, accepting refugees of countries that the U.S. military has invaded. So moving forward, has invaded implies that there is U.S. military presence against the wishes of those in power. It doesn't necessarily need to be like the government. Like we look in Afghanistan, we would argue that the U.S. military invaded Afghanistan because the Taliban was in power at the time. We'll get into why this is important later, but it's not just the government who has control of the country and how who says we were invaded. It's like the actual people in power that decide whether or not they were invaded because those are the actual effects, right? Okay, framing. At the end of this round, the question is simple. Do we make things better or worse for the region? Because everything the US does has to be about the region and what's happening in the specific place that we invaded because we obviously care about that region because we have military people there. Okay, this is how you should vote. Whichever side makes it better for people in the region wins. This round should be judged on like irreversible harm reduction, meaning the side that avoids the most harm for the people in the region wins this debate. Like the harm that can't be undone. You don't care about impacts that like don't actually matter and that don't like actually happen in the real world. Like my opponents might get up here and provide you with an impact of like nuclear war with like a 1% chance of that happening. Because it's such a low impact, you don't value that to like an 100% chance of 100 people dying because that's actually probable and that's going to happen in our side of this debate. Okay, moving forward, the negation must prove that it is not like that it's not really correct. The government must prove that it is. Mechanisms, you weigh impacts on reversibility, how we can like reverse them, and if they're easily reversible, you value impacts that aren't easily reversible, and probability, are they actually likely to happen? Okay, definitions, prioritize just means treat as more important than something else. Everything else is pretty simple. Okay, contention one is stability. Subpoint A, U.S. goals. The main reason that the U.S. invades a country is to create regional stability. We go into that country to promote to stop terrorism, to like stop like the government from killing their citizens. Like we look Venezuela, we look at the reason we invaded was one to stop Maduro from like killing his citizens, and two to stop the cartel from people in power. My opponents might get up here and say like it was narco terrorism, but the entire reason why narco terrorism exists is because the cartel is in power. We go in there to promote regional stability. No, thank you. I have a lot to get through. Okay, moving forward. When the U.S. starts a conflict in another country, it is their moral obligation to help the innocent people they have hurt. If the U.S. military goes into a country, destroys the people in power, destroys the government because it's like what President Trump wanted to do, then it is a moral obligation to make sure that the people who we displace, the infrastructure that we destroy, those people need a place to go. Those people need some place to go. The U.S. has the infrastructure to do so. The U.S. has like the economy to do so. Like we have the largest economy in the world. We have the biggest infrastructure in the world. We are able to do this, yet we are not. We're not like providing the people who we displace a place to go. We're providing like the people who like just, and that we're providing people who don't like who the U.S. didn't have a direct impact on a place to go. We prioritize the people that the U.S. actually affected. Okay, from the Bergen Project, a country with people in poverty has an increased risk of conflict and violence, civil war and rebellion, crippled economy, and has more corruption. The U.S. is literally going in and destroying the infrastructure. Like we look Afghanistan, we look Iraq, we see those infrastructures were destroyed when the U.S. military went there. This leads to more poverty for the people in that country. Those people in poverty then can't get out of their country unless the U.S. provides them with like the opportunity to do so. And like it's their moral obligation to provide them with the opportunity to do so. How will a country actually be able to become stable if they have a crippled economy where the people are constantly threatening to revolt? Like, we give you this great source here telling you, like, the people in the place, the people, like refugees, are more likely to revolt and cause regional instability because they're not happy with their government. The U.S. prioritizing these people getting out of this country promotes instability. Okay, subpoint B is responsive measures. When the U.S. military invades a country, many things happen. The first, the country we have invaded builds up their military, becoming stronger. Again, it's not just the country, like, it's like the country doesn't necessarily mean the government. It can be like the terrorist group that controls the country. Like the cartel builds up the strength, the Taliban builds up the strength, Al Qaeda builds up the strength, because that's what actually happens in the real world. When this happens, there's like many impacts. We'll get into this in a sec. The second thing that happens is these adversaries become more aggressive as U.S. presence is a direct threat to their sovereignty. Like, we literally look Afghanistan like 10 years ago. We said the U.S. being there led to the Taliban becoming more aggressive, killing U.S. troops, but not just U.S. troops, killing Afghanis, killing like Afghani citizens. This isn't that bad because like if the U.S. is leading to the direct death of these people, we have a moral obligation to make sure they don't die, right? Okay, the third thing that happens is local allies take more risks as they believe the U.S. is backing them. The U.S. military is the strongest in the world. Like, these local like rebel groups who are rebelling against the people in power take more risks because they think like the strongest military in the world is backing them. This does like a couple things. We'll get into this in a sec. But the fourth thing that happens is the U.S. acts as a military guide, but not an economic one. We'll again get into this in a second. Okay, one, a stronger adversary directly impacts citizens. We look at Afghanistan, we see the Taliban going stronger, directly impacted citizens. When the U.S. got there, the Taliban became stronger. They killed more citizens. It's the U.S.'s obligation to make sure these citizens don't die. We do this by prioritizing this acceptance. A more aggressive regime hurts more civilians. Same point. More risky allies means the U.S. is drawn into more conflict, leading to more death and war. Even if the U.S. overthrows the people in power, U.S. nation building has never worked. We look Afghanistan, we look Iraq, we look all these places. U.S. nation building doesn't work. The U.S. military can overthrow the government. But what happens when the government's overthrown? There's no infrastructure and there's millions of people who are displaced. When we displace millions and destroy their infrastructure, it's our moral obligation to make sure that they have a place to survive. Okay, subpoint C is global cooperation. We see that the U.S. does this, other people follow. If other people follow, we inherently solve the refugee crisis. Okay, subpoint contention 2 is political dissent. We see, we see in our current world, in the current U.S., there's mass polarization. Like, when Trump's having dinner with Nick Fuentes, it's not really like a good sign for our country because like it's just mass polarization, right? We see literally protests on the streets. Like last Friday, we saw 7 million people protest. So because our world is like our country is incredibly polarized, we look at the main issues. What's the main issue? Immigration. We see that it's like Trump himself, the U.S. literally like obligates themselves to do this thing, to accept refugees, to accept the people of the country we invaded. We see that Trump is now seen in a better light by Democrats. If he's seen as a better light by Democrats, there's less polarization in our world. If there's less polarization in our world, there's less risk of civil war, there's less, like, more people vote, and it's a net good for our democracy. Because we impact the people of the region, because we become a stronger U.S., because we provide the people who we directly displace, because we provide the people who, like, the infrastructure whose infrastructure we destroyed, whose house we bombed, a place to go after we do this, we win this debate and you vote go. Thank you, Judge.
All right. Again, my name is Trevor Jacobin. I'll be the first and third speaker on the negation today for HillbrookJJ. Just a quick off-time roadmap. I'll be going over kind of just some large framework things. I'll be going to off-case contentions, then I'll be going on case in order. If anybody needs me to slow or clear during this round or speak up, please let me know. Great. Are my opponents ready? Judges ready? Okay. My time will begin 3, 2, 1. Now, proud to negate, the U.S. ought to prioritize the acceptance of refugees from countries that the U.S. military has invaded. So first of all, they give you this observation that it's a value round, so you should be like evaluating what's morally correct. We think, first of all, morally correct is so subjective that they don't even tell you what this actually means. They basically tell you morally correct is about reversibility, but essentially reversibility is a net ben impact. We think that they're really just boiling this, and it ends up boiling down to consequentialism and like actually helping people. We think that like objectively you should be weighing this on just net benefits, whoever gets helped the most. We think the moral obligation here is to take impartial actions to help those people who need them the most. So they tell you like this moral valuation without actually telling you what that morally correct thing is. They just tell you it's good. It doesn't mean it's good. We think you talk about the people that are really impacted and the people that are hurt. That's what you're actually valuing this on, net benefits. Second, okay, onto the framework. First of all, we want to define prioritize as to designate or treat something as more important than other things. Okay, on the framework, first of all, we think all human life is equal, so we think that designation of like one's moral values like sets precedent for oppression and hierarchy when you like say people are less important and deprioritize them to other people. Second of all, humans have an obligation to help people in whatever way they can, so we should be helping people as much as we can for the sake of like actually like solving that harm and their hurt that they are experiencing. And especially like third, we must like actually wait, what does it say? Third, we can also we must talk about the most dire situations first. We can always accept refugees from like countries that need it at a later point in time, but we should always be like looking at the people that need them the most, like the people that are like objectively need them the most in the worst situations when we're looking at which country we should be accepting refugees on. So another observation I want to make is that like they're basically the affirmative is arguing for a world where the U.S. is always like putting all these people above the rest of the world, while we're saying like it could be situational. Maybe these countries could have like certain countries that the U.S. military has invaded could be like objectively worse in those situations, but they won't be all the time, and we'll get to this later. So we want to also mention
how they talk about like really making things better for the invaded people.
Oh yeah. Not talking later. Okay, great. They also want to just like point out the last invasions that the U.S. had was like Iraq and Afghanistan in like 2003, and we'll get to this a little bit later. But Iraq wasn't even about like the quote unquote regional stability. It was about U.S. hegemony and trying to like stop them from having nukes. Okay. We also wanted to find like give you some background on like refugee acceptance. Right now, the current program for the U.S. is to like only they have to require like proven persecution targeted towards a certain group of people to accept them, and so like war and cartels where there's like mass death and mass fleeing are currently not accepted under refugee statuses. People that are facing domestic violence and like huge corruption and instability within regions are also not accepted. So this is like the current status for U.S. refugee acceptance. First of all, onto the first disadvantage is U.S. hegemony. We think that the first uniqueness is that when you have the system of prioritizing the acceptance of refugees from you've invaded, now you're prioritizing like countries that are limited and directly connected to a U.S. sphere or U.S. like intervention. So like all these countries are countries that are directly tied to the U.S. for their interests because they probably invaded them for like some geopolitical reason. We think that the link here is that this creates like a systemic concentration on certain countries that the U.S. focuses on, so for like specific geopolitical power. And what this does is like first of all pushes other countries out of like the sphere of aid. So when you have such a focus on just the countries that you want and you've invaded to, now you're neglecting a ton of countries that aren't in this direct sphere of your like involvement. One example of this is Sudan. Sudan is the largest refugee crisis in the world. Like 37.4 million people have been like displaced, and like there's 25 million internally displaced persons as well. And what you see in Sudan is that the U.S. is like revoking refugee statuses for like the IDP because they don't have like this certain interest. And we think that when you prioritize countries because they haven't invaded places like Sudan, now they get pushed out, and now they like now you have people in the worst. As you said, I have a lot to get to. I'll get to it later. And so like you say, Sudan is like is an example of like you're pushing Sudan out because they're not specifically related to actual like military involvement. And we think this gets exacerbated, especially when you're like specifically putting this policy of prioritizing a certain country. We also think that like this also links into U.S. acting as like the global decision maker over impoverished countries. So they're like deciding which ones they want to like prioritize because of the ones that they're linked to the most, rather than looking at like an objective measurement. We think that like something in an objective measure, for example, could be like a human rights index where you're looking at like the amount of people that are impacted and to the degree that they're impacted. This means that like the U.S. we think that they should be focusing on just accepting the countries that need them the most and the refugees that need them the most, rather than prioritizing a certain subject because of like some certain moral obligation because like you military invaded them. We think that if a country is suffering more than another country, there's a moral obligation to help the country that's suffering the most the first, as they say. So now we're going to like just say like another example of this is the Central African Republic, where there's like 800,000 refugees in a horrible situation, but the U.S. is neglecting it because it doesn't have like a specific like political interest in it. And we think this is what the affirmative is arguing for: a world in which the U.S. neglects other countries that aren't tied to its interest and tied directly to like its involvement. And then we get like this like tens of countries that are all like staying in like impoverished and staying in situations where they have instability because their U.S. is not like taking efforts to actually help the people that need it the most. Second, on stratification, we think that first of all, like this is the pick and choose policy. You're designating who is more important based on like what you think as your relation. This also links into what you see as like the U.S. history of like minority suppression and what this and the impact this impacts out to like when you have like prioritizing certain refugees over others that you're linked to. Now the U.S. has like this kind of like power complex where they're designating who's more important and who's like morally better, and this also ties into U.S. histories of like manifest destiny, where we're saying like there's a moral and religious right for white settlers to come and colonize because like it's what's morally better, and so we think the U.S. deciding what's morally better off of like a situation that's tied directly to themselves is really harmful and sets a precedent for like continued stratification and suppression throughout the United States. We think this is a large scale impact for like all the minorities in the U.S. and also just like generally sets a precedent for the rest of the world because the U.S. signals as well. First of all, okay, let's go to on case. First of all, they tell you also like on the framework like you should be only looking at irreversible harm reduction. We think no, you should be just like weighing impacts. We think that a magnitude can like outweigh reversibility in some instances if value to life is like more impacted, because you could have like 2 people that like died versus like 10 million people who had like some like quote unquote reversible impacts. We don't think that that necessarily means you're prioritizing only the 2 people who died. We think that they can be weighed and this will be done like in our PMRs. Second of all, first of all, okay, on stability, they say that the U.S. invades for stability. Like we say this isn't always true. Like they like number one, they invaded the Philippines to liberate them from Spanish colonizers. They also invaded Iraq for like nuke and hegemony protection. So this is just like simply not true. The U.S. isn't always trying to stabilize these regions. The U.S. often invades for its interests, and it's not tied directly to like an effort to help the people. We think this is the precedent you set when you like when you prioritize people from like military interventions, and also give them a justification for like for their actions, or saying like, oh, now we're like helping them more, so it's okay that we invaded because now we're helping them again, right? So like and at the end of the day we're gonna help them more than we hurt them because we're involved, and now we have the situation where the U.S. is like deciding that like now they have like this like post-requisite like designation for what they did and like how it's right. They also say like what was the second thing? Responsive. They said like responsive measures, and like you build up an army and it gets worse after the U.S. does it. We think that this isn't localized to the U.S. and again like countries like Sudan have like civil wars where there's like a ton of buildup that's at a higher level and people are being more impacted. But if the U.S. is like not prioritizing those refugees, like then those people are going to get even worse, and that situation is going to get the worst. Another thing to note is that like often aid is linked to the acceptance of refugees. They're between the two. So like if the U.S. starts to accept a lot of refugees from a country, they're also like likely giving them a lot of humanitarian aid. And so if you're neglecting refugees from a country and not accepting them, you're probably not also giving those countries as much aid. So that links into like just helping like those tens of millions of refugees within those countries. On the second contention of political disadvantage, they say like it polarizes the country and like the Democrats will like him. We think like first of all, no, like Democrats want to help people regardless of who they are. We think like this emphasis on saying a specific group of people are owed like the best stuff is like what Trump is using to justify the like domestic polarization of like in pushing out people that are immigrants, and so that's not like gonna help polarization whatsoever. And then second of all, like they say like well, my partner will expand on this later, but thank you.
Hello, Judge. My name is Chalk Kuso. I'll be the second affirmation speaker. For quick off-time roadmap, I'll be going top of the case stuff. Then I will be going into my opponent's case, doing a quick line by line. And then I will be frontlining, just like reviewing the refutations they just made. And then I will finish off by just kind of like strengthening our case, telling you what they missed and why everything still stands. So if everybody's ready, judges, opponents, everyone ready? Okay. Please begin on my first word. All right, to get right into it, let's talk about some like this top of the case stuff. They give you this like value of net benefits. Okay, that's pretty much the same thing as like what is morally correct. They say that morally correct isn't like a good way to like weigh this debate. We're not saying that's how you like should weigh this debate, but we're saying that is what you should keep in mind when like judging, because when you like think about what is morally correct, like it's just what is the right thing to do. We know there's good, we know there's bad. We know stealing candy from a baby is bad. We know helping like a kid who is lost in a park find their parent is good. That is what is morally correct, is following that moral compass. That is important when we're looking into this case. Next, we give you like this framing at the end of this round. The question is simple: do we make things better or worse in these regions? Then that is how you should vote. This round should be judged on irreversible harm reduction, meaning the side that avoids the most harm and cannot undo wins. Okay, next, going into my opponent's case. First, they talk about this idea of like US hegemony. That means this is like really their sole contention. So if we can prove on our side that US hegemony increases even at an equal or greater rate, then we win this debate already. And I will prove you exactly why. Because what happens when the United States fixes one of their biggest problems? Like currently a big problem in the United States is like immigrants. What is the US doing to help immigrants? We see that on a global scale, like they're being like looked down upon because they are not helping these immigrants. But once they start helping refugees, once they help solve this refugee problem, their image gets better on a global scale. What happens when you have a better image on a global scale? Your hegemony increases. You therefore have like more influence on a global scale. Your allies trust you more when you have proven to help the like little guys, help the people who need help. That is how your hegemony increases. That is how you get like better relations with other countries. That's how you get more trade. More trade equals like a better economy. This then equals a better hegemony. Next, the US, they say like US invades for geopolitical reasons, and they give you the example of like Iraq and like stopping a nuclear or like taking nukes away from Iraq. That is inherently solving for regional stability. By taking away nuclear weapons from Iraq, you are inherently creating more peace by stopping this like powerful like bomb that could literally destroy the world. That's inherently creating stability as a whole and stability inside that region. So therefore this directly like feeds into our case. Also, they say that the US like only invades for geopolitical power, and like the last invasion was Iraq, but also the last invasion was literally Venezuela. We went into Venezuela, took out their president. That was for the reason of trying to protect the people. We saw that Maduro was doing these horrible things to his citizens. We saw that he was killing people. It was being run by Maduro. It was being run by like the cartel. We see all these horrible things that were happening, and that is why the United States went in and took him out.
They don't respond to this in the first speech, so it's strong.
They also don't respond to this in the first speech during the refutation, so it's dropped throughout the round.
Is a covert CIA operation a military invasion?
I don't know.
Yes, it was literally the military who went in and took them out.
Delta Force.
It was Delta Force. Like that is literally a military intervention. Okay, next. They say how Sudan is like not getting any refugee help from the United States, but how does this actually change in their world, Judge? If the United States isn't like currently giving them help, then why will they give them help in the future? What we're doing is actually helping people. They give their own value, like a life for life. A life is equal. If we're helping any life, like that is still good. It doesn't matter where it's coming from. We are one life saved is better than no life saved is what we're saying. It's like, who's saying that the US is now going to go into Sudan? My opponents like can't promise you that. They can't tell you that. Given the fact that the United States hasn't done it, then we should believe that they won't. What we're doing is actually proving to you where the United States will help these citizens, where the United States will help these people. Also, we give you this example of how it's like their moral obligation. This is because when the United States goes and like bombs someone's house, bombs someone's hospital, hurts someone's infrastructure, it is their moral obligation. It is the net benefit thing to do. What helps the most amount of people is helping those people who they harmed. That is what then creates stability. That is what's helping those people recover from the harm that they caused. These innocent people don't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. They deserve to be helped. And what we're doing is providing a way to help the people that we are harmed. That is the most net benefit thing.
The U.S. military, when the U.S. military presence also makes it easier to get the refugees out.
As well, when you have U.S. military presence, it's also an easier way to get these refugees out because the U.S. will already be in there. They can help like protect these people, help get these people out, because when they see these human rights abuses like firsthand, when they see all these like problems firsthand, they're then able to actually make a change.
Like when the Taliban took power.
Like look to the Taliban, and when the Taliban took power in Afghanistan, we see that they committed horrible things. They were committing crimes against their citizens, all these horrible things. They were running the government. The United States was then able to go in and help these people because of the fact that they saw all these horrible things happening. We also give you like this point that goes completely high refuted, where like when the United States goes in, military in that country also increases. That inherently, like when you have a corrupt like organization such as the Taliban with increased military presence in a country, that is inherently hurting the people. So by the US taking out those people, we're saving those people from like horrible organizations such as the Taliban, that hence saving lives. Next, my opponents talk about like the Central African Republic needs help. This is the same thing. First of all, like the United States isn't in the Central African Republic, so therefore, why are they gonna like help them? We're still like, it doesn't matter really who it's coming from. We're still helping more people than this route from right now. Next, we also give you this example that goes highly unrefuted of how other countries will follow the United States. If there are other countries in the Central African Republic, we've seen how like just in policies, like the United States does something, their allies like in NATO also do it. So what happens is when when these other countries follow the United States example, when they start helping refugees, these other countries then help the refugees in where they are also starting wars. This inherently helps the refugee process or refugee like problem, because we're inherently helping more people. When you have these like countries that are like usually in wars, are usually like involved in all these wars, then helping these refugees, you have inherently a much less, like many less refugees. Okay, next they talk about like this pick and choose idea. Like this is perpetuating like manifest destiny ideals. Judge, first of all, just any life saved is better than no life saved. And my opponent's like solution to this is not help the people, and then we just leave the people to go get killed by the Taliban. Judge, this is not right. This is not the most net benefit thing to do. It doesn't matter like who you're saving if you're saving a life that would be killed. Like the same way we're saving a life, my opponents give you this value themselves of like all human life is equal. So as long as we're saving any sort of human life, that is what matters. That is what we are saying. Okay, next they talk about like again this idea of like manifest destiny. Judge, just like gut check this. Manifest destiny was like straight up imperialism. This is like the United States helping people that they like harm due to conflict. Okay, next, going into some frontlining, they say like we should give refugee spots to those who need it more. First of all, like who says that this will actually happen? My opponents can't say that, we can't say that. But what we are saying is that we're actually giving an example for people to actually be helped, for the United States to actually make a difference. We also give you this great analysis from the Burgeon Project that a country with people in poverty have an increased risk of conflict and violence, civil war and rebellion, crippled economy, and has more corruption. This means that a country cannot become stable unless we help these refugees. When they're refugees in poverty, this then creates a world with like a country with a worse economy. Like take Venezuela, for example. If there are refugees in Venezuela and like the United States wants them to become more democratic, they want to stabilize that government, but yet they can't because everyone's in poverty. When they help those people in poverty, that's inherently helping the Venezuelan government become more democratic, become stronger, therefore going back into the people, helping these people. Next, they say that like the U.S. invaded the Philippines for other reasons. This was a byproduct of the Spanish-American War. This was to stop Spanish expansion. It's like the same idea as the Monroe Doctrine. I know the Philippines don't exactly fall under the Monroe Doctrine, but it's like the same ideals that was founded off of. Like the United States want to stop Spanish imperialism. That is why they went to like the Philippines, Cuba, like all those other countries during that time period. That was to stop Spanish imperialism. That was trying because the United States was trying to help. Next, they talk about like this idea of attacking Iraq to stop nukes. But again, this is inherently stable, as I said it before. So for these reasons and so many more, I urge an affirmation ballot.
All right, so for the second speech from the negation, I'll just be going over, oh yeah, my name is Shreyan, I'll just be going over the top of case, the framework, and then just trying to break down the round for you between our contentions. And then I'll probably go first onto our contentions and their contentions. My time, if my opposition, or sorry, is the government ready? Judges ready? All right, then my time could start on my first word. All right, on the framework, I think we're getting very bogged down in the details about what morally correct means and what net benefits means. A lot of the times, like, actually they say this in their first speech, they say that we're not changing how many people are accepted as refugees, we're just changing who is accepted under the current framework of refugees and how they're accepted in the United States. So basically, I think you can apply that to all of their points about how it's signaling for helping more people, and we're just overall helping more people in their world. This is just not true. We're helping the same amount of people. The only thing we're changing is who we're accepting and who we're not accepting under the current framework of refugee acceptance. They also try to go really hard on this point that we're trying to make things better for the invaded people, and that's what the framework should be most concerned with. But we're talking about under net benefits, which they accept as the morally correct thing. It's just minimizing harm in general, not necessarily for those who the U.S. has invaded. It's like we're saying that all life on Earth is equal, and that all people should be treated equally by the refugee acceptance system, not just because they've been invaded in the past by the United States. Also, they try to go back to this of irreversible impacts the most thing. They don't really give us any new warranting on why that's important, and so our warranting about how other impacts like 10 million people having a lower quality of life is still worse than 2 people dying, that still goes through, and you should still weigh impacts overall and not just the most irreversible ones. Now, on the off-case contention, I think the government loses the second they talk about increasing U.S. hegemony, because our point was not that U.S. hegemony is good, but rather that U.S. hegemony is bad because it contributes to the oppression of those in other countries and U.S. centrism in the U.S. viewpoint. Especially when the U.S. has so much power, increasing hegemony more isn't good for the rest of the world because it allows the U.S. to make decisions for other countries that we're not the best equipped to make, and probably
You know why?
countries interest the most. Yeah.
Who fills the void when U.S. hegemony decreases?
The U.S. like if U.S. hegemony decreases, you have a multipolar world, not one where everything is just controlled by one country. You have other countries that are powerful, countries like China and Russia, which aren't the most democratic, but other ones like Canada and the EU, which have good democratic values, also exist. You just have a more balanced world in general. The U.S. wouldn't just go from having full hegemony to nothing at all. It would just be another power within this framework overall.
So there's like if they come up and say like US is the only one, I think it's like a really Western, like really
Yeah, if they say also that the US is the only one who can do this, that is the same kind of Western-centric logic that we're critiquing here and saying like the US shouldn't be the sole power that has this kind of ability and hegemony over the world. So if they're saying that we increase US hegemony by making the US look good and have a better image by helping immigrants, that actually is really bad. And there's also just the link here is really weak because they're saying that it makes the US look better for helping more immigrants when in their own framework they conceded that what they're talking about is just changing who is accepted, not accepting more immigrants. Now, over and over again, the last speech talked a lot about how one life saved is better than none, and that net benefits is about helping those who are harmed. We totally agree that one life saved is better than none. We just believe this actually helps us because the problem is not about accepting more lives or preventing like more deaths or accepting more or less refugees. It's just who is accepted and who isn't. It's more important to help those who are in greater need, we believe, than just those who we've affected in the past. There's like also there's an overload of refugee applications right now. The problem is not that we're not taking in enough refugees, it's that we have a lot of refugees coming and we need to choose who to accept. And we believe that we should prioritize those who are most in need, not those who have just been invaded by the US in the past, because that is a more effective way to help people and save lives and create greater net benefits, because we're minimizing suffering, not just going off of a moral obligation that's really abstract. They also try to make this point about how the US military being in a region makes it a lot easier to bring in refugees and extract them. The thing is, refugees are not the same thing as military extraction, because most of the refugee applications we get are from people who have traveled to the US to make their case. They're not actively being rescued by the US military from those countries. And it's also a big assumption to say that, yeah.
What happened in the fall of Kabul?
I don't know the specifics of the incident you're referring to, but when you look at places like Central America or like Sudan, those aren't places like the U.S. is actively invading and getting military people to get refugees from there. Those are people.
Sudanese applications were denied.
Yeah, like thousands of Sudanese applications were denied. It's not that we don't have the ability to like get refugees here; it's that we don't know who to keep, and we're trying to decide who to prioritize the most. And when you look at who to prioritize the most, we believe you should be prioritizing those who are most harmed, not just those who have invaded in the past. Our point about Sudan having a large refugee crisis went totally unrefuted. Places like Sudan, Somalia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, all of these places have extreme refugee crises, and the US never invaded them. That doesn't mean we should be prioritizing them less. That means we should just be looking at them as another country with really bad circumstances and evaluating those refugees based on their need, not just whether or not we've invaded them in the past. Because those countries have it a lot worse than some of the countries we've invaded in the past, they will get prioritized more under the NEG framework, creating better net benefits for those people by minimizing their suffering more than suffering would be minimized for those who have just invaded in the past. On our second contention about stratification, they say that basically like the next solution is just leaving people to be killed and that any human life saved is good. We totally agree that any human life saved is good. We just disagree that the next solution is leaving people to be killed. We actually think the AF leaves more people in worse circumstances by prioritizing just based on like some kind of moral obligation rather than those who are most in need. And that we actually reinforce in the AF world this kind of US-centric view and imperialist logic, not by like actively doing more invasion and stuff, but by saying that we only have obligations to those who have invaded and focusing more on that sphere of influence that the US has and centering US policy around that sphere of influence. They also just they drop our point about how the US accepting refugees from places generally increases the aid we send to those places, benefiting those places more, and that those most in need should be prioritized. In essence, this case really has boiled down to basically who should be prioritized in the acceptance of refugees. Should it be those who have the most need, or should it just be those who have come from countries that have invaded in the past? And the negation side here is saying that those who are most in need should be prioritized. On to the AF case. Their first contention is all about how stability is the most important issue and how like the US has invaded places to create stability and we should be prioritizing creating long-term stability. I mean, sure, we can accept that the US's priority in invasion should be stability while also denying that it's always been the case. This entire point about whether or not Iraq and Venezuela were stability creating invasions is long-term like kind of irrelevant in evaluating like the actual important issues in this round. Whether or not the US invades to create stability doesn't really do anything to affect who we have a greater moral obligation to. all of their points about how like the US destroys infrastructure and how poverty is bad are totally true, and we totally agree with the fact that poverty is really bad and leads to horrible consequences for the nation. And we're not saying the US should prioritize places less because they've invaded them. We're just saying they should get the same priority as those from other countries based on need. So if the US has destroyed a lot of infrastructure in a place and that place is doing like even worse than, for example, Sudan or Somalia, the refugees from there would still get priority. It would just be need based rather than like moral obligation based. Also, the fact that we've previously invaded a country doesn't mean we have a current occupation of them. So all the points they make about the military presence, like right now, being able to extract refugees and cause more damage are just untrue. Also, they basically dropped their contention about how terror builds up strength. Like, we tell you that not the U.S. isn't the only country whose invasions cause terror groups to retaliate. It's not a U.S. unique issue. Any country with conflict will have these kinds of dangers. It's just the U.S. shouldn't like just prioritize those that have danger created directly by the United States. It's non-unique. And their mass political polarization thing, they have no solvency for this. How are Democrats going to actually switch to liking Trump just because he changed which refugees are being prioritized to those who the U.S. has invaded in the past? That just doesn't align with Democratic values. For all these reasons, we believe you should vote for the invasion. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Halftime roadmap. I'll just be going over a framework overview and just going over some layers that you'll be voting on today. Is the affirmative ready? Judges ready? Great. My time will begin in 3, 2, 1. Again, so proud to negate. On the framework, which goes conceded throughout this round, we have 1. Human life is equal, which means that basically, like, the amount of morality or whatever is just based on the amount of harm that we can solve. So it's 2. You are voting for the side that solves for the most harm of people. This is not about some objective duty or morality based on something you did. This is about the objective amount of people that are being helped and to the degree that they're being helped. So you're looking at the refugees that are hurt the most and looking at the refugees that are suffering the most, and we're solving for whoever can, like, actually help those people that are suffering the most in our instance. Second, as the opposition, we're not advocating for like the deprioritization of like past military invasions. We're like basically advocating for just like an equal standing point. Everybody is treated the same. Everybody is looked at based upon their need, not based upon some U.S. linkage from their past or whatever. We can say that like even if the U.S. invaded somewhere, it may not be worse than somewhere else, and we should help the place that's somewhere the worst place first before we help this other place. So we are looking at those countries first, like for example, the Central African Republic and Sudan as the places that we should be looking to first in accepting refugees. The third thing here is that refugee application is like the acceptance, and it's not like an intervention. So we're maintaining the equal amount of people we're accepting, and the refugees are like all applying. These are not people we're extracting from countries. These are people that have applications to the U.S. that are being reviewed and either accepted or denied based upon whatever basis it is that we're deciding in this round. We think that basis should be need, not linkage to U.S. intervention. Now, first, on U.S. hegemony, they completely turn and concede this whole contention for us right when they basically say they're helping U.S. hegemony. They say they're going to come up here and try to tell you in their next speech about U.S. hedge is good and alternatives are bad, but they dropped all the links in the first speech and conceded the fact that U.S. hedge leads to like this decision-making over these impoverished countries and pushes people out of the sphere of aid, especially because they talk about how U.S. signaling is like a big thing. If the U.S. is neglecting these countries and focusing on the places that they've been involved in the past, those countries are perpetually neglected, and this is what we currently see. This is what we see in the status quo, and this is what's going to happen if you prioritize this military intervention as a linkage to helping refugees. China and Russia and whatever other geopolitical spheres, they're gonna come and say those are like really bad. They're gonna like debt trap people or something like that. But we think that like having a multi-geopolitical influence doesn't mean that the U.S. is like gonna be like removed from involvement. They're going to be still involved. They're just gonna have voices from different sides, which keeps it more balanced. We think hegemony in any direction is bad, and we think that like making sure that people have a balance is going to be the best way to have people within those countries have their own voice and decide for their own selves, because we see like hundreds of millions of people suffering because of hegemony from the US and hegemony from other countries. We think hedge is bad in general, and when you have this prioritization of linkage to your sphere, it increases this capacity for hegemony and helps the people globally. This is the biggest impact in this round that you're going to be looking at, but we think that we think that this is going to be the consequence if you prioritize a certain subset of people. The second thing you're looking at the layer you're voting on is this concept of stratification. They kind of don't touch what this actually means. They just say like any life over no life. But what we're saying is that like this pick and choose mindset of instead of like evaluating on like an objective harm in people that you're helping, you're evaluating based upon like your relationship to them. This is going to mean that people that don't need the help are going to get less help, and this leads to the mindset of like moral superiority, where you are the only people that are ethical, and that it is your place to decide who needs help more, rather than like evaluating on like a net benefit framework. And this leads to like again like this mindset of like a minority suppression and stratification, because the U.S. like currently in the status quo, Trump thinks that he owes a duty more to the people that are white than to the immigrants and people that are suffering, and this is going to perpetuate in purely an AF world. On the negation world, you're voting for like kind of an arbitrary evaluation of who's going to be the refugees accepted. In the negation world, you are voting to help the people that need it the most. You are voting to accept the people who need it the most in a place where people will remain actually happy, and making sure that people are not disprioritized simply because of their linkage like outside of the US sphere. This is why you're voting negation, to help people and minimize harm. Thank you.
Okay, speech order is just gonna go responding to the neg block, then it'll go summary of, well, first it'll go summary framing, then it'll go responding to the neg block, then it'll go like summary of the entire debate, and then away. So if my opponent's partner and judges are ready, please begin on my first word. Okay, so they get up here and they tell you that all human lives are equal, right? We entirely agree. Yet, not saving someone when it is harder to save them, prioritizing saving someone you can't save and not being able to save them doesn't matter if you're choosing, like, it's in that bad if you're choosing to sacrifice a life of someone you can't save. That's where my opponents lose this debate. Okay, so we have this like whole framing thing. We like give you irreversible harm reduction. They like kind of respond to this. They think we're just doing morally good, but we give you like an intense frame they like barely respond to. They just say that morally good is subjective, but we give you like actual framing, like morally good means net harm reduction. Like it's we really just like agree on it, so they just wasted their time there. But even so, let's move forward. So onto the neg block. Okay, so they don't really respond to the point that it's easier for the people to help when the U.S. is already there. They give you like a kind of one response to say like the U.S. isn't extracting people, but I peel one and I say what happened in the fall of Kabul. They don't know what happened, so I'll clear this up. The U.S. is literally extracting Afghani citizens on planes, thousands of Afghani citizens by planes, helping these refugees.
Stop time.
Yeah.
We've already interchanged on this fact of extraction before. This like example of the fall of Kabul is completely new. Let me finish.
Good.
And so I think judges should probably disregard the specific instance. So
the extraction point was brought up in my second speaker's speech. You guys respond to this. This is purely a front line of what you guys said in your speech. You guys said the U.S. doesn't extract anyone. I'm simply giving an example of when the U.S. extracts someone. You said this in your MO, so I'm responding to the MO. This is our first opportunity to respond to it. Judges, you flow this through. But even if you don't, I'll still win. Okay, we'll leave it up to judge discretion, but I'll begin in 5 seconds. That's okay with everyone. Okay. Then they also like tell you that like the U.S. doesn't have troops there because it has invaded, but they concede this in my first speech. I say that the U.S. being there is it like the U.S. the military has invaded means that there's U.S. troops there. They concede this and they give you like a throwaway response in their MO, like so you don't flow this through. But even if you do, we still win because the U.S. having invaded means there's still some U.S. troops there. Like we look at Afghanistan, we're not currently occupying it, but we still have troops there. That makes it easier to extract. So because it's easier to extract refugees of places where the U.S. is, we win this debate. We don't have people in Sudan. Like the people in Sudan have a hard time escaping, so we're not saving these people's lives. We're saving the lives of people we can save. That's where we win this debate. One life equals one life, but one life saved does not equal trying to save another life. So we win here. Okay, next, they talk about like we have an overload of refugees. Yeah, we say that prioritizing it actually makes it so we accept the refugees. They don't respond to this. Next, they talk about like they say these people are leaving the country, but we tell you like these people can't leave the country without being killed. So these applications aren't coming from the U.S. They're coming from the places and then the people extract them. Okay, next we talk about the U.S. Helping the people who are invaded is not good. But this point literally, like, we turn this point entirely because they give you like this whole like imperialism point. But we tell you like my second speaker gets up and he tells you that the U.S. helping the people of the country we invaded inherently goes against imperialism. No country that invades another country, no like empire helps the people of the country they invaded. The U.S. doing this is inherently not imperialistic. Okay, and also they barely respond to the fact that other countries will follow. They say that other countries following is bad, but they give you all these examples of Sudan and the like Central African Republic. We tell you that other countries that the U.S. is allies with have troops there because other countries follow that they literally concede to. This means that these other countries will help extract these refugees, which means that these people are also being solved. They may not come to the US, but they go to the UK, they go to France, they go to Italy. That is a net good. So we save these lives of the Sudanese by encouraging other countries to do the same. They don't respond to this, so we win this debate. Because we save these lives, because other countries follow, saving the lives of what countries they have invaded, which is like Sudan, which is the Central African Republic. And because the US is helping refugees in the best way they can, we win this debate. Okay, they also say that it doesn't mean that we're currently they also say like the other countries invaded. Again, we turn this, like they say like globalization is like a much bigger issue, not just the US. We literally turn this, but it literally just proves our point. This is where they concede because it shows that if other countries follow, they already have troops there. So that means they will also help. Okay, on to our case. They barely respond to political dissent. They give you like a throwaway refutation. Say like Democrats don't care about immigration, but they don't get to like the key. Democrats like want to help anyone. They don't respond to like the key point here. Just saying that like Trump doing anything to like help solve the refugee crisis. Trump doing anything to like prioritize a refugee, like a country like he invaded and he chose to invade, is inherently good. Making Trump look better in the lights of Democrats means the Democrats don't see him in such a horrible light, which bridges polarization. They don't respond to this like actual analysis. They respond to one link that is incredibly like it's incredibly faulty refutation. Okay, on to weighing in voter issues. There's a couple key voter issues here. We'll go through them. One, is the US like going into these countries and like prioritizing the refugees of people being invaded doesn't mean more refugees are safe. We argue yes. We tell you that the US having troops there makes it easier to get these refugees out. It makes it easier to protect these refugees because the applications aren't only coming from the US. They're coming from people who want to come to the US in these places. And by extracting them, we save these lives. By not having people there, like there's no way the US can help the people in Sudan by not going in. Yeah.
The articulation that you are now actually able to accept more refugees is new. You said explicitly before that you're accepting the same amount in either world, so this is new articulation.
I said in my first speech that it, one, could be the same, two, increase. We give you this political dissent point that like Trump like doing something leads like more immigrants and more refugees accepted. In my first speech, you entirely dropped this. It's one away, continuing this link. It's like, so you judges, you flow this through because it's one, a continuation of a link that I brought up, and it's two, my MG brought it up. So we win here, but it's judge's discretion. So I'll continue. So could I have 5 seconds, please, to find my place? All right. Let me see. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, the second is the US like promoting regional stability. They say Russia and China will take the US hegemony. This is where they lose this debate. Russia and China don't care about refugees. They say this in their second speech. Russia and China create more refugees by having these other countries that take the US hegemony. They say like Canada and the UK. It won't be Canada and the UK. It will be China and Russia because they're already powerful. This means less refugees accepted. They say multi-voices are good. Multi-voices aren't good when 2 out of 3 voices commit mass human rights abuses and kill citizens. So we win here. Okay, because we actually solve for the refugee crisis, because we actually lead to more stability, because we lead to more global cooperation, which means other countries accept more refugees because of this prioritization, because we solve polarization in the US, because they don't actually like give you like an actual impact besides the fact that US hegemony is bad and like the US is imperialist state, and because we actually say the US helping these refugees is anti-imperialism and we don't like suppress minorities, we win this debate, and I urge a government ballot. Thank you, Judge. Great debate, guys. Thank you, judges.
Yeah, great debate. Thank you.
Great round. So we each fill out our own ballots and then come back with RFD, right?
Yeah, we'll turn our cameras off and let you guys.
Well, I don't think we confer, do we?
No,
I didn't think so.
no. This is independent. Okay, bye.
Okay.